Hey everyone, I wanted to take a second to go through the carbon cycle slideshow that I created for you. So I am on Google Classroom. I'm going to click on our classwork, scroll down to our assignments for this week, 4-6 through 4-12. And when I click on that, I can see the carbon cycle Google Slides. All right, so we're going to focus on the carbon cycle. There will be 4 total cycles that we do towards the end of this unit, but today we're going to work on the carbon cycle. So our learning targets are to interpret diagrams of the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and water cycles. So again, today we're just focusing on carbon, and this week we will be doing nitrogen as well. Oxygen and water cycles will be next week. We're also going to describe how human behaviors impact the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and water cycles. So I think the most important thing to do to start is figure out what is the carbon cycle. So carbon is an element on the periodic table, and the carbon cycle is the movement of that carbon between biotic or living factors, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, and abiotic, which are non-living factors. So this shows a nice diagram of things that are occurring between both biotic and abiotic factors. So the sunlight, that would be an abiotic factor, but it's producing light for this tree. That tree is going to undergo photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is also going into this photosynthetic process. And then eventually the tree dies. So this decay, along with animals producing waste, this life, death, and decay results in fossil fuels. Okay, so fossil fuels we use in our gas tank, oil, gasoline, things like that are fossil fuels. So from there, when we're burning our fossil fuels, we're burning that oil and things are being released back out into the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide is actually in the atmosphere through the release of the burning of fossil fuels. There's a couple of other gas exchanges that occurs between biotic factors as well. There's gas exchange of plants because photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide but releases oxygen. And with the breathing of animals, animals are actually taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. So that's how these things also get back into the atmosphere through biotic factors. Now, something to think about, all living things contain carbon. If you end up in college and you take a class called organic chemistry, it is the chemistry of anything containing carbon. Any compounds with carbon, that's what you would study in organic chemistry. Now, many abiotic factors also contain carbon. So we talked about how, carbon is in all living organisms, but it's also in not organisms, but in abiotic factors or non-living factors. And some examples would include water, air, and rocks. Calcium carbonate might be something that you've heard of. So there's certainly carbon in the carbonate portion of that compound. So carbon's also present in the atmosphere in the form of gas, carbon dioxide, and it's in the ocean and fresh water as dissolved carbon dioxide. Fun fact about carbon dioxide, if you drink like a soda or some sort of fizzy beverage, what that is carbon dioxide that has been put under pressure and dissolved into whatever beverage you're drinking. So when you hear that pop, when you pop the top, the tab, when you pull it back and that comes out, that's actually air escaping from being under pressure, which is why your can is so hard when you squeeze it, but after you open it, it's a lot more permeable and you can kind of squeeze it. All right, so let's talk photosynthesis. This is a major way that carbon dioxide is cycled. So photosynthesis, plants, algae, autotrophs undergo photosynthesis to produce energy. So the sunlight obviously is necessary for photosynthesis, water is necessary, but carbon dioxide is necessary as well in order to produce that glucose, which is a type of sugar, and it also produces oxygen. So plants and animals can live very much in harmony with one another because animals, when they're exhaling, are exhaling carbon dioxide, and plants need that to grow. And if you were to think of a plant exhaling, it would be exhaling oxygen, and animals need that to survive. So some people you may have heard like, "Oh, talk to your plants; they grow faster." If that's true, and I don't know that it is, but if it is, it's more than likely not that they're feeling well loved and cared for because they're part of a conversation, but because you're close to them and the carbon dioxide on your breath is actually entering through the stomata on their leaves a little bit easier because you're closer. All right, we're going to talk cellular respiration yet. Normally, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are our first two units, but where we were in school and we decided it might be good to get you guys outside, we kind of hopped around with the units a little bit. So typically, people know a little bit more background information about cellular respiration before going into this unit. So please know I'm not expecting you to know everything by any stretch of the imagination, and I've tried to simplify it as much as I can. So with cellular respiration, basically what's happening is we eat food, we digest food. There's a bunch of chemical reactions that occur, and we create something called ATP. And ATP is what our energy or what our body actually uses for energy. One of the blooper, there goes my earring. Um, one I forgot what I was saying. One of the byproducts from cellular respiration is carbon dioxide. So if you look at these arrows, we've got our mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Um, and this oxygen is something that's going in, okay, because we're breathing. We need it for our cellular respiration. And then all these chemical reactions take place. There's this stuff that you haven't heard of yet and all that. And then eventually what comes out of this process of cellular respiration is ATP and carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide is part of the carbon that is involved in this carbon cycle. So it is released as a byproduct. And then we have decomposition, my favorite. So decomposers we talked about a little bit in the first week. Some examples were mushrooms, bacteria, fungi, worms, and what they do is they break down organisms into their chemical parts. So they're eating things that are dying and decaying, and they're returning them back to simpler versions or simpler forms of themselves. And as I said earlier, carbon's present in all living things. So as these decomposers start to break down matter that was once alive, that carbon is then being released back into the ground or wherever this decomposition is taking place. It can happen in the ocean too. Decomposers, as I said, break down things into the elements that are present in the organism. And as we talked about, carbon's an element on the periodic table, so that's one of the things that gets broken down as well. All right, let's talk greenhouse gases because carbon dioxide is a focus that we've been talking about a lot in the slideshow. But you've probably heard the term greenhouse gases, and I think that this is a really great opportunity to sort of cross units. So we have a unit that is human impact, and we'll be spending time on that unit at some point during the trimester. But I thought it was important just to take a little bit of a snapshot of what greenhouse gases are. And what those are molecules in the atmosphere that absorb heat. So if we kind of need some, we need some of them because if we didn't have greenhouse gases, then this would be a freezing planet that really probably wouldn't sustain life. So we need some to warm up the planet. But when you get too many, then the heat starts to really increase, and we see problems like glaciers melting, flooding, habitats being ruined. And one of the examples of a greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide. So that's this structure right here. There are a lot of other greenhouse gases: water vapor, methane, ozone, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases, and these are their chemical structures of each of those. And so I just wanted to pop that in there for a second just to give you something to think about. And also, here's a nice video on greenhouse gases and further explaining what those are. So this is a carbon cycle diagram, and it explains kind of with air. It reminds me of a food web, but kind of how carbon in the atmosphere gets there and what happens to the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So if you were to look at this carbon cycle, you can really just dive right in. So I'm going to start with carbon in the atmosphere and where it goes. Okay, so this arrow shows us that carbon in the atmosphere goes to plants because plants use carbon to make food. Okay, and then from there, it goes two places. The plants are going to either be eaten and provide carbon to the animals that are consuming the plants, or they're going to die, and the animals might die as well. Now, once that death occurs, if the bodies are not decomposed after many years, they become oil or coal deposits, fossil fuels, like what happened to the dinosaurs. Or if they break down further because of decomposers, then they're releasing carbon to the atmosphere into the soil. So part of it is going right back into the atmosphere when they die. Now, in addition to these bodies that haven't been broken down, they become fossil fuels. Stop that. One pathway is that they end up being burned, and the carbon returns to the atmosphere through like smokestacks and things like that. I'm afraid to move my cursor because that thing's going to pop up again. So the other alternative, if the bodies are not decomposed, become fossil fuels, then if they're not burned, then carbon slowly releases these substances and they return to the atmosphere. So as you can see, there are a multitude of different ways that carbon is passed through both living and non-living things. And there isn't necessarily a certain order to which that occurs, but there is always a cycle. And then finally, we talk a little bit more about human behaviors and how they impact this cycle. So, just a couple of facts: the burning of fossil fuels increases the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. I think we learned that from previous slides. In the last 150 years, the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere has increased by 30%. And this is increasing the temperature on the Earth, which is really going to have a snowball effect once habitats start to be lost. So this is just a nice visual that I'll let you look at on your own. I hope that you are well. Hope you're getting outside and have a fantastic day. I will talk to you all soon.